The union budget is usually read 1 year at a time. We put Thurro Answers to work to read 8 years together. That is, union budget speeches from financial year 2019 to 2026. Analysed as a sequence across language, structure, and intent. Because some insights only appear when scale meets interpretation.
Hi, Pradeep. Excited to welcome you here to talk about the human and AI collaboration that we did over the last couple of weeks on the budget and the economic survey.
Hey, Akhilesh, hi. Yeah, it was fantastic. Happy to talk about it, yes.
So the budget has come, and we've seen how the government has created some fiscal space for itself with a 4.3% fiscal deficit to GDP, slightly keeping to the same numbers that it was earlier and deviating from the reduction in fiscal deficit that we had seen over the years. But this is not a conversation to talk about what the specific budget said, because the markets have reacted to it, many economists have reacted to it, and indeed the action has moved away to the trade deal. What we want to talk today, Pradeep, is the fantastic work that got done on Thurro Answers, where you read through 8 different budgets over a period of time. Why did you decide to do this? How did you do this? Let's talk more in detail about that.
So I think the idea about doing something like this was always to understand what has been the trend, because obviously a large part of our work at Thurro and understanding insights is to understand the trend, and it's just not about the budget, it's about the market, it's about everything that we do over here at Thurro. So the understanding was that each year's budget gives you a number, gives you a projection, and kind of compares it with the previous year's budget. Uh, and data, as we know, in isolation doesn't give you much insight. So we decided to look at it from a longer perspective, right? We wanted to kind of increase the lens to look at budget documents from as far back as we can. And we realized we had about 8 budget documents on Thurro and a couple of interim budgets, but we disregarded the interim budgets and just focused on the regular budgets. And it started just as an experiment to see what answers the machine can actually give. And from there it just evolved, because the answers was fantastic. What I found is that Thurro Answers could read through the text of all 8 documents. It could give you exact moments, exact answers to exact questions about, X number of things, and it could point and give links of what it was saying about that particular topic. And it was an enriching experiment that way. So yeah.
So it's very interesting, because given my own background from the sell side, where when we would look at the budget, the first thing we would do is start typing into our Excel and look at numbers. But what you did very differently was to look at the language aspect of the budget, because that's where you were able to find the different nuances. What are the different cuts in the budget or in the language that you saw? What worked? What did not work?
So what also happened when we started looking data from a longer lens, we got an understanding of things in 2 different ways. First, as the world that was, we actually had a couple of budgets before the pandemic, then we had budget speeches during the pandemic, and obviously after the pandemic. So how the world, how things happening in the world changed, obviously the sentiment in the budget, the language in the budget, and the tone and everything else. At the same time, it also gives you an understanding of the government itself. That we started when the government was finishing its first term, then we went through the second term, and now the government is in its third term. It understands its constituents well. It understands the dynamics in India well, and how the language has moved from that understanding of India. 2 things that we understood is, uh, before the pandemic, the vision, the dialogue, and the speeches were more like ambition, understanding from what we had, and trying to build, showing the dreams and ambitions and working towards it. So the fundamentals were still an idea. They were trying to build processes, set in processes. Things were still a little bit abstract. as we moved forward, and the tone was more like appeal and understand and persuasion, right? As we moved from that into the pandemic years, the tone shifted considerably. Obviously, that was a lot more protection, a lot more trying to persevere during the pandemic period, a lot of safeguard, uh, safety and everything, all that kind of sentiments came into play. As things progressed from there, one other thing that came during the pandemic years was, because the world was closed, right? We were all locked inside the walls. The Atmanirbharta kind of thing came up from there, that we have to be self-reliant. We can't just develop on things happening outside because the world is closed right now. So sometime, if something like this happens in the future, we have to be self-reliant. So that terminology and that kind of talk came from there. And as we progressed post-pandemic years, I realized that the government was becoming a lot more confident in what it was saying. The tone was from ambition and abstract moved into kind of safeguard and protectionism during the pandemic years, were more confident and more fundamentally structured, right? The government had put in structures, Atmanirbharta, Made in India, whatever. And it was now confident that it had put in processes and it now wanted the execution part. So the tone moved accordingly.
Pradeep, this is interesting because what you were able to see in this was the change in tone. As a person who may not have been familiar with budgets in general, did you approach this as a layman? How would you think about some of the learnings that you had when you were approaching this? What were some of the best ideas that worked for you when you were chatting with the AI? Give us some tips and tricks of what worked for you.
The idea was to approach it as a lay reader, as a general reader who doesn't understand much of macroeconomy and industries. So my questions were also very generic. We decided to break this entire exercise into multiple sections. So in one section, we just kind of track the evolution of the budget. In another, we just focused on the social constituents. We another week just focused on the industrial focus on which sectors the government focused in which budgets and how that progressed over the period of time. So there were different cuts, and the idea was to keep the prompts very simple, because the simpler you keep the prompts, the higher the chances that it will give you consistent answers and more in-depth answers from which you can then derive your learnings.
And so the way you went about is when you picked up a topic, let's say which sectors that the government has focused on, you asked it multiple questions, then you generated an AI summary, and then you would write as a human in the loop and learn from that and write. Talk to us about how much time it took you on a particular topic, how long were your questions, how long were your outputs, etc.
So I think we did like 7 notebooks on this. Specifically, if we talk about the sectoral notebook in which I asked Thurro Answers about the focus on different sectors in budget speeches over a period of time. I think I generated about 10 odd notebooks because we wanted to focus on each sector simultaneously across 8 speeches. So they're like 10 into 8, 80 parameters, right? Almost. And then you have to generate, let's say, one notebook which you are satisfied with the kind of answers that you get, and then you can make the same questions for x number of sectors, and you just can create a task and put it, and it can do the work. I think in all, the machine Thorough Answers took about maybe an hour and a half to generate all these notebooks, and then it was up to me to compare them and write them in the way it needed to be written.
And as you saw this, how deepened was your understanding on different sectors and different aspects of the economy, what do you think you would have wanted to do more, but you could not do?
I think the only constraint was time and space and the details that you can give in one particular piece, right? Uh, my understanding, there are a couple of learnings from this exercise. First of all, obviously, is that you can't beat the machine at reading these documents in speed, right? I'm not saying that this could not have been done by a human. It could have been, but not at the same speed, at the same pace, or in that much depth. At the same time, you also need a human layer to understand when the machine is actually making creating errors, right? So for example, because I had to do this process multiple times, I knew that there are 8 speeches, and I had to come up during every notebook to my first question would be, how many regular budget speeches do you have? And sometimes the machine would tell me it has 2 speeches, 3 speeches, 8 speeches. So it kept changing. So at that point, you have to be, because even the most perfect machine is not 100% accurate all the time. So you have to be persistent, and that is where you need a human intervention, because you know that there are 8 speeches. You have to persist till the machine gives you 8 speeches, and then you can proceed from there. So that is number one learning, right? Number two learning is that uh, would give you, let's say, what the budget has said about a particular scheme which was brought for women, in which year it was, on what page of the budget speech it was, and it will link it there. So it goes into that much depth, right? So it was highly, highly accurate. And there are a lot of things, because what happens is, obviously, you learn some things during that year of budget, and then you forget about it, and it doesn't come up because you nobody talks about it. There are certain failures also which nobody talks about, right? Certain schemes that failed, certain schemes that did not generate any momentum at all, and that were dropped. Nobody talks about it, and that's the reason nobody remembers it. But the machine knows, because it comes up, up with those names, and then you realize, oh, something like this got dropped, and then you ask about it, and then you get to know about it, and then you can write about it. So obviously there is a learning about the human machine in relationship, but there's also a lot of learning in the sense that something that is easy to miss in these documents, uh, you will be able to find it using the machine and using AI.
So let me take you back to your journalism days. This is a topic of budgets, etc., that you came into in the level of depth that you did as part of this exercise. So if you were to peg your understanding now of the budget making exercise, what the budget said, how it has evolved, etc., uh, if you trace back your journalistic career and you were picking up a new sector or a segment, would you say the amount of work that you were able to do is like a first year journalist person, or maybe a fifth year, 10th year, or what aspects of it were uh, very young, what aspects of it were very, very refined, and what in your journalistic mind, where did you place this?
No, I have always believed that the machine is as intelligent as the human operating it, right? You need to know the right prompts, and you need to know the right questions, and you need to know where in depth you have to go. Like, I remember even when we were doing this entire exercise, and we had the skeleton of all 7 pieces that we wanted to do, and I had multiple sets of questions, because that was the first notebook we generated, on the basis of which 7 more notebooks got generated, right? And you told me that break it down to 7 different questions, because right now what you're asking is to identify AI, uh, the impact of 8 budget speeches across 9 constituents. So that is like 8 multiplied by 9, 60, whatever, right? 72 different kind of parameters. So if you break it down into segment wise and then constituents wise, it will be able to give you better answers. And it actually did. So that's what I'm saying, right? So uh, it gets it is refined, right? The AI is refined to the extent that it will give you answers according to the questions that you ask. And how smart are those questions depends on how intelligent you are and how much experience you have in certain field, in certain sectors, or working with AI. So I wouldn't say it is very young, very old, or whatever. I would just say that it is actually very adaptive to the kind of questions that you ask, to your own intelligence and your own interpretations. So my own understanding from AI on Thurro, or for that matter, any other AI service, is only as deep or uh, as my understanding before that, right? So from the information or from the questions that I bring to the machine. So yeah, and I started asking these questions as somebody who knew nothing about the budget speech. And by the time I ended, it actually was pretty refined. So, you progress and you evolve with the questions and with the notebooks and for as long as you work with this AI.
And I could see that because when the economic survey came and you had to then repurpose the whole thing from an economic
Yeah.
survey perspective, that turnaround happened rather quickly. Our ability to read the sort of various economic surveys over the years and to come up with how the economic survey tonality has changed or thesis has changed came. Do you want to talk about how that may have been easier for you or what you learned in that?
So absolutely. Just in terms of volume, right? All the budget speeches, annexures included, are about 60 pages of PDF, right? So in all, you are reading about 8 multiplied by 60, or let's take 70, those number of pages. The economic survey of this year was 723 pages, if memory serves me
Yeah.
right, right? And we had like 7 or 8 economic surveys of that kind of volume. Uh, so the ability of the machine to read that kind of volume of text is just mind blowing, because there is no way that I could have done, or maybe seven of us could have done the same job that we
Mm.
ended up doing with the help of AI, right? Uh, so while that is just the volume part, right? The output part, obviously, it was better informed because I had already made a couple of notebooks. I had done these queries with the budget. So I knew what kind of questions to ask when the economic survey came around, and when we knew that we had to do something about the economic survey. And the economic survey was also like not just the eve of budget, it was like a couple of days before. So we had to be prepared for that. So because we did some notebooks for budget, we knew the kind of questions that we wanted to ask, and kind of understood what kind of answers to expect as well. Uh,
Mm.
Directionally, they were same. Obviously, they in depth and tone, they changed and everything, but directionally we knew what to do, and it became easier because other if it wasn't for AI, I don't think a turnaround on economic survey would have been possible at all.
Mm. So now, as you have done the economic surveys and the budgets, potentially you think this could get linked to, let's say, all the monetary policy committee documents. How would you think the next set of users could potentially come to? What type of documents you think you would want to read using AI,
I
especially
think
thorough answers?
like I said, right, it started as an experiment, and the experiment was more or less successful in my mind. And the more I think about it, the more I am of the view that you can follow the same practice across anything. It's just that we decided to do it on budget documents because obviously it is the budget time, and we wanted to do something about the budget, and we wanted to understand what the budget, how it progressed over the years. Uh, you can actually take the same set of learning, same set of questions, tweak questions, and you can run the same hypothesis and the same experiment across, uh, financials of companies, or the analyst calls of companies, or like you said, MPC policy documents and everything. And you see how the evolution of those things have happened. I think over a period of time, what has happened is that so much data comes along that you are kind of drowning in data without knowing what to pick and what not to pick. And because the volume is so much, you do not have the time or the ability to read them longitudinally over a large period of time, long period of time. What the machine actually is helpful, and AI is helpful in this case, Thorough Answers, is it has a huge depository of data, right? On some sectors and some companies, we have data going back, I think, a decade, 15 years or something like
Yeah,
that. So,
at least a decade, yes.
yeah, so reading anything over a period of time is actually helpful. I'll just give you one example, right? When I was I remember in graduation when we had to read Shakespeare, I was told that you don't have to just read The Tempest, but you have to read all volumes of all
Mm.
the writings of Shakespeare to understand the mind. So I
Mm.
think this analogy is just like that, you can't just read one document isolated in time and space and understand everything. You have to understand the nature of its evolution. You'll have to read over a longer period of time. And AI and Thorough helps it that way. And it can be replicated in any segment, as we have seen during this process.
This was a fantastic conversation, Pradeep. I must also commend you that as we discussed this with our clients and policymakers, there was significant praise that we got for all the writings that you did on the budget and the economic survey. I think people found it very refreshing and also found a very new way, unique way in which you had looked at it. Typically, a lot of commentary becomes the here and now, the picture of the budget, as I like to call it, rather than the video that you were able to create and see the transition. Thank you so much for spending time with us, talking to us about how you have gone about it. I hope the audience who listens into this and also uses Thorough Answers is able to now take the learnings from here and use it in the context that is relevant to them, whether that is with respect to the annual reports that they want to read, the management discussion analysis segments that they want to read, that the companies put out, MPC notes, or just go back to the documents that Pradeep created with respect to budgets and economic surveys. We sincerely look forward to doing more such analysis as we go forward. And we also look forward to the feedback and inputs and praise from all those who listen into this. Thank you, Pradeep.
Thank you, Akhilesh. It's been fun. Thank you.